Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cloud-Driven Data Insights in Government, sponsored by Microsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Don Adcock, the Acting Chief Information Officer in the Energy Department, Greg Garcia, the Executive Director for the Army Information Technology Agency, Bajinder Pal, the Chief Information Officer for the Federal Trade Commission, and Derek Strasbaugh, a Senior Solutions Specialist at Microsoft Federal. Now, gentlemen, before break, we were talking about the integration of cloud and data analytic tools, but also whether they're happening in the mission side, on the back office side, or sounds to me like everywhere it's happening, as Bajinder said. So I know both Don and Derek were ready to jump in. So let me go to Derek first. What are you seeing in that? Are customers asking Microsoft for help on one side or the other? Or is it, as Bajinder said, it's really about that flexibility, the ability to have that infrastructure meet your needs no matter where the needs are?
It's exactly that. I mean, we're seeing it span the continuum. It's not front of the house, back of the house, any particular types of applications. I think the point Bajinder made is really key. It's the ability to be agile and honestly be able to provide big data tools and analytic capabilities around the cloud, whether that's infrastructure or whether that's support services. Just to use us as an example, last week we made a bunch of announcements in terms of some of the new services we were onboarding to our Azure cloud platform. These are services that typically would be on-premise services, things like data pipelining, the ability to put together very sophisticated workflows for bringing data together from multiple disparate data sources and ultimately being able to consume on-premise, off-premise data sources, public data sources, and bring them all together into a kind of a cloud-based data lake, if you will, if you're familiar with that terminology. So the idea being that these services are available on demand. They're not the traditional big, expensive, difficult to set up, difficult to maintain services that you're used to working with from an on-premises standpoint. Data analytics traditionally has been the domain of very, very few, and it's been very, very expensive to support, both from an IT operational cost as well as just finding the people that can actually do it. So one of the things that cloud providers like ourselves have been trying to do is innovate in that space and basically democratize, if you will, cloud analytics to lower that barrier of entry so that as we do have customers, regardless of what the role is within the organization, saying, I have data, I know there's value in it, I want to be able to get to it, that we're not limiting the number of individuals who can actually perform those types of analytical tasks.
Oh, the democratization of data analytics. I like that. So it's good alliteration. I know
it's election day, right?
It's getting there. When we talk about, for instance, the movement of data analytics make it easier, then we have to get into the workforce. But before we do that, Don Adcock from Energy.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what everyone else was sort of saying. You had sort of opened up asking us about the convergence of cloud computing and big data, and I sort of just wanted to give a little bit of a different perspective on that, which is I kind of view it right now, with the Internet of Things and these vast amounts of data that we're trying to deal with. I really look at it as we're at a time where these things are crashing together. We have the crashing together of technologies, be them cloud technologies, mobile technologies. It goes on and on and on, and really, as we've all said, what we get from big data is insights, right? We need to be able to have the right tools, the right search capabilities, the right interfaces to data that provide intuitive ways to gain access to these vast amounts of data. And I think really harnessing what you get out of a cloud solution, which is huge space and storage abilities and the ability to move quickly, and then the data analytics tools coupled in that environment, you really start harnessing the power of what we're trying to get to and what we really need to drive both business and back office decisions.
The crashing technology, I think you're absolutely right. I think, and that's why, in many regards, once agencies picked up the cloud and said, okay, we see that this is viable, that this is valuable, these other things have come so quickly, the mobility, now the data analytics. But this is not without concerns. And let me turn to Greg, we'll start at the far end of the table and then maybe work our way back. The concerns around cloud, security came up several times, so why don't we address the security, the big monkey on our back, security, but also what about workforce? Because as Derek said about the democratization of data, do you really still need that workforce person, the data scientist? And that's a hard position to fill, I'm being told.
Absolutely. I just like to make one comment about the data lake. Is it a data lake or is it a digital landfill? That's a really important distinction that has to be made. Is just because we have the ability to put a lot of data in the cloud, should we and what do we put up there? That's something that we have to struggle with, because the tendency is to put everything in the cloud and use big data analytics to figure out everything. Well, that's going to work for a while until you're petabytes of data, and then that goes into to more and more and more. And then how do you maintain and how do you decipher what's important to store? And that's really the link to security, right? So there, as you see in the public news, there's lots of relationships and understanding you can gain from big data. And there are things you can do for good or evil. And that's really important to understand. There's really, I think, a policy issue about big data that's not really been addressed, about what do you do with that and what kind of conclusions can you pull and how do you implement those conclusions, because that's certainly a competitive advantage, and that could be, again, used for all sorts of things. One of the things we're looking for in the DoD is the Joint Regional Security Stacks, and then really a kind of a global net ops forum. So if you imagine you put security through a regionalized footprint, so you have less footprint to manage, and then get those analytics through the cloud for net ops, you can globally manage the network. You can see relationships that are what are not obvious now become obvious because you're correlating data from across the entire globe. You can see trends and see the flow and ebb of data or attacks. So the net ops part of that is a great management tool that's really in the cloud that can see a global perspective. And then you get the cybersecurity part of that, is you can see through the Joint Regional Security Stacks where exactly the magnitude of threats are coming from, how they're evolving, and how you can respond. Because really, when someone looks out one window, they see one pane of glass. When you look out another piece of window, you see another pane of glass. But if you can look out all the windows at all the time, you can see the whole environment. That's really the key for DoD, is to see that whole picture, the situational awareness, both on the net global operation side and also on the security side, to get that full picture so you can have decision space about exactly how to respond to that.
But help me understand for something real quick, because I think the situational awareness is important. I think we can talk about that in any context. But when it comes to cloud and big data, is the data bringing you that situational awareness? Is that the point you're making?
Right. It's the correlation of what appears to be a small event that maybe actually be a series of hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of small events that are all really part of one event. That's the difference about big analytics, is that you can correlate and decipher what appears to not be a trend to determine if it is a trend. Correlating that data across, again, all the data points, you can see patterns and make sense of what appears to be isolated events, because they may or may not be isolated events.
Let me turn to Bhajinder from FTC. One thing that you guys have very similar to the DoD and energy is the data sensitive. And yes, your public website in the cloud is simple, and that makes sense. But you guys have a whole host of other data that you need to protect. What security concerns do you have in those two different realms?
So clearly, I mean, from the FTC's perspective, I think we are sort of known as the privacy cop on the street, if you will. I mean, data security and privacy are of paramount concern to us. But I do want to go back for a minute, and I remember what Anish Chopra, the former CTO of the White House, used to often say, that innovation and security can and must coexist together. And I think if you look at sort of the past 2-3 years, how cloud computing and big data is sort of migrating forward, and the technology is maturing, I think the one of the key fundamentals of FedRAMP, which is security in the cloud, has matured and become such a practical solution for the agency. We are leveraging that. Clearly, I think when we look at it from a business agility standpoint, the ability to provision infrastructure and ensure the proper controls are in place, I think, from our mission standpoint, even, the security and privacy is of paramount concern. We are able to leverage, quite frankly, FedRAMP, both low and moderate at this point. And the fact that the FedRAMP context gives us the flexibility to modify and change the controls. So we are seeing a tremendous flexibility in that. But there's no one silver bullet, obviously. There's no one size fits all. So we look at application in context of what we're trying to protect, the data that we are provisioning. So in many cases, we are implementing a hybrid approach. The information that is less sensitive, of course, we will leverage cloud to the extent that we can. Where privacy and security is of paramount concern, then obviously we maintain that within the data center at FTC. So it's case by case. But in the long term, it's really about information architecture. I mean, we really have to understand the data, normalize the data, understand the structured data and the non-structured data, and how to provision that in the right cloud context and the big data, if you will.
Isn't what you're really talking about, though, the differences between, you said, the hybrid approach? It's a public cloud, meaning a commercial provider, or a FTC cloud. I mean, in the end, everything's going to be in the cloud in that sense, even if it's a private, FTC-owned, operated, run, lockdown cloud.
That's exactly right. And by the way, I mean, I do want to say this, from the CIO's perspective, we have to take a very business-centric approach also. At the end of the day, I mean, we have to look at these technologies and ensure that we are providing operational efficiencies, right? I mean, cost avoidance or cost savings, and at the same time, leveraging the right innovation to respond to the business. So I think there obviously there's a tremendous amount of anecdotal information that demonstrates that by using a combination of public, private, and hybrid cloud in the right context, there can be very significant savings and operational efficiencies. So we're constantly looking at that. We're looking at all of these different models in the cloud to meet or address the need of the FTC's mission. Absolutely.
Don, you were shaking your head. Give me a sense from Energy's perspective.
Yeah. So from I agree completely with your CIO perspective. One of the things that I sort of feel is the majority of our security concerns across the federal space, they're ubiquitous. They're the same, right? We really have the same. And to me, it doesn't necessarily always matter whether or not it's big data in a cloud solution, if it's small data and an on-prem solution or on a device that's federally owned. The data, the security issues that we're facing are the same. The data needs to be secure. We have to have high data integrity. We need to make sure we don't have loss of data when there's a data, or I guess it's more when there's a data breach. So I think we're all sort of looking at security from different aspects. And again, I go back and sort of want to say, to me, it's not always about whether or not it's an off-prem cloud solution. My concerns don't go up when someone says, let's take this to an off-prem solution and use industry to provide. I think it's at times like that we rely on the hybrid approach. A lot of this is culturally based. People feel still today, if they can't touch servers, if they can't walk to data centers, then maybe it's not as secure. But I think if you sort of look at the landscape of breaches over the last 8 to 12 months, government is not the only sought after knowledge base, if you will, by some of these people that are seeking to do harm or steal data. Most recently, we had the executive order coming out of the White House and out of the president for improving the security of consumer financial transactions. And I think for the first time, we're actually starting to see the consumer base taking a look and saying, hey, security is incredibly important. So I go back to, hey, we need to make sure data, no matter what solution we choose, be it a government-only cloud solution, if we team with industry partners and provide an off-prem industry-based solution, which we do at Energy. Our energy.gov is provided off-prem through a cloud provider, but then we have others that we provide to ourselves. It really is about getting the service level agreements, getting the requirements down, making sure that you have the things in there to protect data integrity, to protect access, and to make sure that the data that is there can't be manipulated. And if in fact it happens, and I think there's proof over the last year it's going to happen.
It's going to happen,
right? So if in fact it does, you've got to be able, and we've been incredibly successful with this over the last year at Energy in working with law enforcement and the intelligence community to go back after those people and say, hey, this is what they took, this is who took it, this is where they are. And hopefully, it's no surprise, with our major data breach last year, it was the analytical work that we were able to do after that and the tools that we brought to bear that said, hey, this is the person who did it, and subsequently led to the arrest and indictment of the individual.
And we could have a whole conversation, I think, about this, but both the chip and pin credit card technology that's coming, but also the work you guys are doing around enterprise architecture. But let me turn to Derek from Microsoft. What kind of requests are you guys getting or seeing from clients, from customers around identity management, access control when it comes to cloud? When people want to put stuff in Microsoft's cloud, what's the requirement for identity and access management?
Well, I'd say the minimum barrier to entry at this point, to go back to something Bajinder said, is what are you guys doing with FedRAMP? Are you FedRAMPed? If so, to what level? What are your commitments around data privacy and security, et cetera? We've been very, very vocal about, again, some of the data breaches in commercial industry, as well as some of the things that have happened internal within the federal government in terms of how Microsoft works with law enforcement and really considers data privacy, fundamental to our trust with our customers, be they commercial customers or federal agencies. So we were one of the early cloud providers through the FedRAMP gate, if you will, both for infrastructure and platform services. We continue to work with the DoD on their security accreditations for the cloud and for various verticals as well, in support of IRS 1075, for example, HIPAA, et cetera.
But are you getting requests, for instance, from customers that say, how do we make sure our HSPD 12 card, our PIV cards, or the CAT cards have access to that cloud? Because it's one thing to put it into your laptop or your desktop, but it's another thing to use it, for instance, to access to a database that's stored in the cloud.
Sure. So from the very get-go, we've been very cognizant of multi-factor authentication and existing investments in PIV technologies, CAT cards, et cetera, et cetera. We work very closely with the DoD, for example, on that for both Office 365 as well as our Azure cloud. And so, hybrid identity is kind of, I think, really where we kind of look to set ourselves apart from the rest of the industry. Active Directory is ubiquitous across the federal government. I mean, everybody has made an investment in Active Directory, and just because we're talking about cloud, and as Don said, not being able to necessarily touch my servers, doesn't mean, again, back to one of my earlier points, that those investments and those long-standing security constructs still don't apply. And, quite honestly, we've been doing secure cloud services since the late 80s. I mean, one of the biggest cloud services out there, Windows Update. Touches every one of our machines, probably sitting at home. So
you remind me, and I'm not this old, so I'll preface this and apologize to the panel now. I remember being told about ASPs, right? Alternative service providers. Then we had managed services, seat management. Those are all basically cloud. And now, if you guys remember when Mark Foreman was in government, he talked about grid computing, and that just kind of, I was so confused when he talked sometimes, having to cover them every day. But now we're actually seeing all that come to fruition in cloud, and it's very interesting. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to start with Greg because I want to talk a little bit about DoD and access control and identity management. But first, we're going to take that break. You're listening to a panel discussion, Cloud-Driven Data Insights in Government, sponsored by Microsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.